Yeah, thank you very much, first of all, for your kind introduction, Ebru. And thank you for organizing this event, especially Robin. Thank you for your invitation. It's my great pleasure to speak in such a young and dynamic audience. So my background is sociology with a training in STS, as you might have heard, and in bioethics also. So my today's talk will problematize practices and techniques of neuroscientists, and thus the constitution of a technocerebral subject, the form of a cyborg, which produces neuronal activity or expressivity and behaves in a way that is especially useful for neuroscientific trials. So this is the overview. I will say something with regards to the treatment of stroke patients, then come to the methods and explain BMI systems, and then I will come to my little cyborg theory or cyborg action theory, more or less. To begin, the treatment of stroke patients is strongly dependent on medical technology. So the neuroscience refer directly to these acting patients with the aim of re-enabling their ability to act through neuroscientific and technological procedures. And in my monograph, The Technocerebral Subject, I described how precisely human and machine are adapted to one another in neuroscientific trials. So the neuroscientific projects I have been participating in doing ethnographical research were part of broader European projects at the intersection of basic neuroscientific research and applied neuroscience. So the projects aspired to develop and apply innovative, non-invasive and invasive brain-machine interface devices. But I will present some methodological insights in the next slide. So, we can also talk later on about the whole qualitative approach, but to keep it short, the analysis presented here is mostly based on my qualitative study of practices and techniques in neuroscience scientists within the project mentioned, following the lab studies, Latour and Woolgar, Knosetina, etc. And especially within projects who examined non-invasive EEG-based BCI BMI and invasive ECOG-based BMI for the rehabilitation of stroke patients. Hence, not only did I do my fieldwork in labs, in neuro labs, but I could also observe a number of brain surgeries, do my ethnographical work in hospitals. I conducted several interviews, and then I of course met several established and well-known and prize-winning neuroscientists, and mentioning neuroscientific trials in general, I mean, which might be criticized a bit, but mentioning neuroscientific trials in general, I refer to those which I was able to observe since the BMI research was also embedded into different neuroscientific trials with a variety of neurotechnologies, not only BMI, but also numerous different groups, both with healthy and individuals and various patients. And within these settings, I myself also was involved in several trials as research subject, playing a game, for instance, a ping pong game via brain signals, training with BMI, and helping patients, of course, and research assistants, etc., etc. So the presented data results from more or less chaotic laboratory settings where sometimes 20 people were involved at the same time, participating in several trials. So you have to just keep that in mind. Okay. Sorry. And so coming to the BMI, as you can see here, all the pictures I present are pictures from myself. So here you can see me sitting equipped with a BCI cap, with the EEG cap. So a brain-machine interface or brain-computer interface is a direct communication pathway between brain and an external device. And there are invasive and non-invasive BMI systems. Invasive BMI produces the highest quality signals of BMI devices when directly implanted into the brain. And EEG is the most studied potential non-invasive interface. It is the recording of electrical activity along the scalp produced by the firing of neurons within the brain. So the recording is obtained by embedded electrodes, which you can see in the slide here. And these electrodes are placed into the BCI cap, which is above the whole scalp. So BCI is intended as, if you ask for what is it good, so BCI is intended as communication device for ALS patients. I mean, the most popular ALS patient was Stephen Hawking. I mean, everybody should know him. So ALS is a degenerative disease. So the BCI is here intended as communication device. So, and in chronic stroke, it is intended for motor restoration. Sorry. So here you can see me as a research subject equipped with the BMI cap, recording my brainwave signals. The signals are, you can see on the right bottom of the picture, you can see the input box. What you can't see here are the amplifiers and so on and stuff like that. But the signals, the brainwave signals, are sent to a computer program, which then analyzes the data to determine whether the brainwave pattern is strong or weak for a special task. So especially when the brainwave signals are in a state of desynchronization, this is important. So when brainwaves reach this state, the computer sends a directional signal via this BCI 2000 program to the device that controls the orthosis. You can see that my hand is stuck somehow within the orthosis and then initiates the opening. So this was the experiment of the study of chronic stroke patients. So each experiment consisted of 15 runs, each lasting approximately 3 minutes. Each run consisted of about 11 trials. So the whole training took 45 minutes, as you can see me sitting there. And the trials begin with the preparation phase, followed by a 6 seconds imagination of movement phase, and then an 8 seconds of rest phase. So the phases were initiated by an auditory command, left hand, go and relax. So you have to imagine that stroke patients cannot move one part of their body. So I mean, this was the right part, but usually it is the left part is concerned. So the patients were sitting there with their paralyzed hand fixed in the orthosis and had to do the trials following by the auditory commands, left hand. When it says left hand, then they had to prepare mentally, I would say so. And then when the auditory command says go, then they had to imagine the movement of their hand, as they cannot move their hand by their own. And then after the imagination of movement, which took 6 seconds, then the relax phase began. Then the patients have to relax. So I named the whole process the socio-biotechnical adjustment process, which can be divided into 3 phases, and I will show this in the next slides. But all these maybe sounds not that problematic, right? What I just said. So, but in fact, to reach this symbiotic relationship, as you can see, from a very static picture, of course, but it is not possible for me to show you videos, but to reach a symbiotic relationship, to synchronize human and machine, there are a lot of preconditions. So, but before doing the participation within the BMI system, this is what I call BMI system. It's a whole system, right? Between brain, machine, between the human and the machine, between the neuronal states and the interpretation of the states, etc., etc. And the research subject has, of course, to be prepared and equipped with the BMI in the first phase of the human-machine adjustment, etc., etc. And I'll come to this now. So I will especially concentrate on the first and second phase of the human-machine adjustment. So first, neuroscientists are taking various measures, mainly concerned with physical and material adaptation. So the preparation and purification of the skin, of the muscle, of the skin above the muscles, and the brain waves, of course, to be detected. And then the coordination and the interaction of biological, physical, and technical mechanical parts comes into play, and this is constitutive for the production of the biotechnical figure as a type of the cyborg, which produces expressivity that is useful for neuroscientists. So in the second phase of the human-machine adjustment, the process synchronous adaptation, or processual synchron adaptation, further processing and classification of the discrete elements of the neuronal states, in particular the various neural states by screening are important, and the coordination and interaction of biological, physical, and technical mechanical by means of neurofeedback is driven through a dressage of the research subject. So during the process of adaptation of human brain and machine computer, the synchron relationship of these 2 components is important, as I said before. So for establishing this synchrony, synchron and stabilize the human-machine relationship, the neuroscientists try to particularly enhance the neuronal areas via stimulation, and this is then the third status. So what you can see here is the first preparation phase, the first process. Here you can see some docking procedures of stroke patients. I mean, this is of course me, it's not a stroke patient, but yeah. So, and then, as I said, localization of discrete elements by means of EEG, and also the muscle push potentials have to read out in order to be aware of if there are the right answers from the right place. I mean, if the motoric area is located somewhere here, C4 electrode, and when you imagine a movement, then the brain waves are active in this area, right? So when you only imagine a movement, then this area is active, and the muscle evoked potentials when you have an electrode on your arm, like this EMG here in the slide, you can see it on my arm that there are electrodes, red, green, and purple one. So then you will get an answer from this area, right? That there is a connection, and this is important. And to get these important data, it is important to have these electrodes properly fixed, and that the docking procedures are well, and other relationships between the biological and technical part is stable. So here you can see some the electrode positions, and how you can see the input box, and of course the EEG cap, and me equipped with the EEG cap once again. So in order to initiate the transformation and inscription, the contact between the biological and technical elements must be ensured, as I tried to describe. And this is why further social and technical intermediaries are interposed. So these are, for example, information technologies or researchers. So the docking procedure over various intermediaries coordinates two things, and this is important. The first is the adaptation of the human to the machine by its techno ability, and the second is the adaptation of the inscription or machine device by its biocapacity. And as a result of the preparation and the process, this whole process, biological elements are visualized in a technical inscription or machine device, and the research subject becomes a biotechnical form. Thus, the epistemic object are the objects, the neuronal data, are visible and also editable in real time. So the EEG shows the current brain waves, and the robot orthosis moves the patient's hand. So coordinative measures taken by the neuroscientists also help the adaptation of physical material, human-machine adjustment, and they are important for the fixation of the epistemic object, which is obviously for neuroscientists the brainwave or neuronal data. So, and this whole procedure makes, of course, the neuronal states somehow manageable and knowledgeable for neuroscientists. Here you can see the, as I said, the reference system in traffic lights. Green means the electrode is good, and red means the interferences are bad. So neuroscientists, of course, try to have good electrodes. So and at this stage, the signals are determined, processed, and cleaned a bit, and they are linked to a normative system of statement, which you can see here. So that's my interpretation. Processed and visualized. And this normative system of statement is different depending on the context. In the case of the brain signals, the impedance measurement represents this normative system of statement which represents the signal quality via traffic lights, as you can see here. So, and in this case, and in the case of the human robot adaptation, as you could see, I was sitting in front of the orthosis and fixed by the robotic orthosis. So in the case of the human-robot adaptation, the robotic orthosis represents the normative system of statement, which brings the hand into action by biomechanics, of course. So since the opening of the hand in this case is biomechanically executed, I interpret this as a reunification of the biological movement process and, as it were, as a biofunctionalization of the technical component. So you could not see, but the robotic orthosis is designed and adapted to the biological function of the gripping movement. So the opening is based on the biological function of the motor system. And as far as the system of analysis is concerned, this means that the latter determines and visualizes the quality of interaction of biological and technical elements. So I will not go deep into this because I cannot show you a video. So, but what is more important is the second phase of the human-machine adaptation, in which neuroscientists' practices and techniques revolve around the coordination or interaction of the biological, physical, and the technical mechanical. The following processes are fundamental. This is German, but I will just explain it to you. So first, the preparation of discrete elements, as you saw, in particular the neuronal states by the screening. This has to be fixed. So crucial here is that clear neuronal states are adequately processed and fixed for further use in neurofeedback training. And afterwards, the coordination of the interaction of biological, physical, technical, mechanical through the dressage of the research subject is in focus. So it is therefore necessary to change its neural states in accordance with the task so that the subject can perform a technocerebral action. So the goal of the neuroscientists in the second phase is the coordination and synchronization. So, and the synchronization represents the temporal aspect of the coordination. And in this cerebrocentristic experimental system, the orthosis control is technocerebrally designed. And according to the neuroscientist intention, the research subject should learn to change its cerebral states according to the cultural techniques of the neuroscience, so that the connection between the brain and motoric skills can be established. And to do this, the patient should change its behavioral activities according to the command phase in the figure in section A. So to reinforce or enhance the slight or even non-existent connection between the brain, what I said, the C4, C3 area here, and the muscle points of the paralyzed hand or the paralyzed arm, the motoric areas of the research subject would be stimulated either during the neurofeedback training or besides the training. So in the experiment, a connection between imagination, brain activity, and behavioral activity is established. This is important because the research subject is asked to imagine the movement, but not actually try to move. And during the interconnection, the boundaries between the imagination, the actual brain state, and the behavioral activity becomes blurred, and the cause-effect relationship of the machine control becomes unclear. And within this control procedure, the technocerebral action loop, discrete behavioral activities are objectified through inscription devices and represent current behavioral activities in section B. These are then decoded and classified by software in order to be able to control the orthosis in accordance with the behavioral activity retrieved in the 3 phases and thus determined. So learning algorithms also ensure the biofunctionality of the machine in section C, which adapts to the research subject and outputs an individual neurofeedback analog to the intensity of the behavioral activity in section D. So this might be a bit complicated, but what I want you to understand is that the research subject acts or interacts in an input-output loop. So the neurofeedback reacts because the neurofeedback reacts to the intensity of the behavioral activity, which in turn has consequences on the algorithms, resulting in a theoretical infinite action loop. So the research subject itself thereby gets into this closed circular input process output loop. And as a result from the described technocerebral action loop, the technocerebral subject is constituted, which in turn results from the social biotechnical adaptation process and thus from the practices and techniques of the neuroscience. So I have only one more slide, so be patient, or thank you for your patience till now. So to speak, it is about the research subject setting his or her brain in a state that makes specific locations of certain cerebral processes feasible, whereby these are in turn read out via software and further processed. And the practices and techniques of neuroscience attempt to purify or isolate brainwave signals for the task, because there are no movement activities to perform and display in the EMG, in the muscle evoked potentials. Researchers focus on cerebral processes visualized in the inscription devices. So only neuronal expressivity should be activated or visible, no motion-related technical movement. So the intended and realized isolation of the cerebral processes represents a split between the thinking, the imagination, and the self-acting, the actual behavioral activity without the intervention of biomechanics in the social biotechnical adaptation process. Social, because the research subject is integrated in a cerebrocentristic socio-technical arrangement of the experimental system of the neural world, where it is involved in various interaction processes, and biotechnical, because the mediated biomechanical mechanically executed by the robot. The movement is biotechnically executed by the robot. So the pure individual action of the subject is thus replaced by the technocerebral action And in this experimental arrangement, the brain plays the central role as epistemic object, since the patient as cerebral subject is integrated with the body as an epistemic medium in the arrangement. So last slide. This is my monograph, as you can see here on the left side of the slide. Maybe it might be a bit clearer now. The patient and his or her body are adapted to the techniques of the neuro world in order to participate in a neuroscience and neuroscientific research project and trials. And this adaptation refers to the cybernetic principle of circularity. So that's why it's important. This is important to point out because, as you might know, that Cyborg stands for cybernetic organism. So technology is also adapted to humans, and this process of adaptation, the social biotechnical synchronization process, reconfigures the brain, the body, and of course the research subject. And within this process, the inscription of the biomechanical produced movement as a part of the imagination of movement is performed or more dramatically implemented via robotic orthosis into the Leib. And this is Leib theory of Merleau-Ponty. A subjectivation effect emerges from these neuroscientific practices, and this effect is manifested in the form of the technocerebral subject, whose actions in the BMI system are carried out as technocerebral actions. And my analysis of neuroscientific practices show that it is a neuroscientific and neurotechnical construction of a technocerebral subject, and it is a cerebral subject that is technologically, neuroscientifically, and neurotechnically established, and which fulfills a certain purpose, the stabilization of old neuroconcepts and thus the scientific paradigm. So once again, thank you very much for your patience. I'm finished now with my presentation and happy to hear some questions. Yeah, you are totally right. So the brain is, of course, the epistemic object of interest of the neuroscientist, right? So, but the problem is that sometimes the patient gets into the defense, so there is then a problematic situation between the patient's well-being somehow and the data collection. Do you hear me? So in practice, in the practice of neuroscience, we find a tension between the well-being and needs of patients on the one hand, and the production of artifact and error-free data on the other. And maybe this question is also interesting for Kenan, or the answer is interesting for Kenan while doing research, while wanting somehow to capture some EEG signals and then modeling them. So as brain waves and data is at stake, the patient's rest and the patient care are subordinated to brain data. And in spite of, or exactly because of that, patient care is important for neuroscientific purposes. And on the other hand, fatigue and demotivation leads to a loss of patients' concentration and increased agitation during the neurofeedback training, generating poor data contaminated by artifacts, which is, of course, diametrically opposed to the neuroscientist's intention. So this is another reason for the importance of motivating patients and adapting test settings to their needs, as the status of the research subject varies between that of a biotechnical form that produces data in real time, and thus the patient's brain being the epistemic object of interest, as you have heard a lot, and the social person integrated in the social biotechnical arrangement with neuroscientific trials. So yeah, as I said, there is indeed a problematic relationship between data collection and patient care in the BMI research. But what is also crucial is here, when you ask for ethical dimensions, or it is important that, as maybe Kenan or others in the classroom, that involves scientists and physicians and so on, should have an adequate training in the conduct of research and be familiar with ethics of research, right? So there are principles, ethics of research principles, for instance, minimizing the risk of harm and obtaining informed consent and protecting anonymity and confidentiality and so on and so on. And the skills of the researchers are very important. Yeah. Thank you for your question. Yes, thank you. It is very important. You have been touched on effective communication within or between interdisciplinary working team members or scientists who work on the same purpose. So I would of course first ask or why should I suggest something? For what? For what purpose? So even what is meant by, for instance, good interdisciplinary work or effective communication. So I, of course, participated also in team meetings, and in team meetings there are different communication practices. For instance, giving report and point to problems or efforts, and collaborative discussion also takes place, and especially when it comes to problem solving. So for instance, the neuro scientists I've met, they discussed several ethical issues within the trials, etc., etc. And of course, when a bioinformatician is somehow studying the EEG signals and setting the threshold when brainwave patterns are weak or not, and so on and so on, and when they have to decide things with matter on the opening of the orthosis, or things touch upon the patient somehow. So then, of course, these people have to be aware of the experimental setting, of the patient, and as I said beforehand, the skills of the researchers are very important. And first of all, it is ethics of research, and it involves requirements on daily work. I mean, we have to be aware of work practices of researchers and their concepts of living beings. I mean, for the physician, it might be another concept than for a neuroethicist, right? And the first step is, of course, to collaborate somehow is, of course, to understand the others, right? So, yeah. And not only on a theoretical manner, I mean, not only theoretical, also in practice, because I've seen a lot of bioengineering people standing next to the patient and asking weird questions. So, to the patients, and yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, I see. So, yes, thank you for your question. It is, of course, a very important question, as you, as young researchers, of course, want to find solutions for problems. And I mean, this is the job of engineering, right? Yeah, and it is very hard for me to find an answer. We have to be aware of the influence of engineering, science, technology, and society, first of all. So, our human values, needs, or problems often determine what questions scientists investigate and what problems engineering tackle. So, for engineering, the application engineering is the application of knowledge in order to design or create something. And science is, of course, the body of knowledge of the physical and natural world. So, as you might say, so, and technology is the body of knowledge, system, processes, and artifacts that results from engineering. So, when we understand this, we have to keep in mind that all the technology we create can be used, not only result from the process of engineering, but also have impacts of our daily lives. I mean, you can see this with the cell phone and so on and so on. So, but what you have to keep in mind is that, I mean, you can be technophobe, yeah, you can be technological friendly, but I would also say technology is not neutral, and technology is social constructed. So, if we want to create solutions for problems like disease, like you mentioned, then we often tend to look for technical solutions and not for social solutions. So, but I would say it would be helpful to look for socio-technical solutions. So, even if you look for technical solutions, you adapt the system that might be not that useful for this patient, right? And the patient is involved in these trials with the hope to enter into a healing process. And very often, this healing does not happen. But of course, it also happens, of course, but it also happens that the healing process doesn't take place. So then we have to somehow take into consideration the ethical implications of what we do, the social implications of what we do, right? Because technology is not apolitical. Technology is very political. We have to be aware of this. So I just would say this, right? But in discourse with the society, this might be the perfect way, you know? And it's also very important to involve the families, as they are mostly the caretakers or the caregivers. Yes. I mean, for instance, BCI for ALS patients. I interviewed 2 ALS patients, and it took me, one communicated via eye tracking system and the other via little contraction, muscle contraction in the hand. And it was very hard for me to interview them. My interviews took 8 hours. One took 8 hours. And I was also observing an ALS patient doing the BCI, and she wanted to type via brainwave signals, aqua, which means water, but because an Italian scientist was there and she wanted to have some water, and she typed, no, she wanted to ask the Italian researcher if he wants water. So she typed Arua, A-R-U-A. And so, you know, you see, she typed this word via brainwave signals in, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, one for one word, and one letter was wrong. Yes. So, but of course, I mean, we could understand it, but you know, the false effects are so great then, are so huge, yeah, that it's frustrating, I mean, for the patients, right? And it is a really long way, I mean, to go. Yes, exactly. And I mean, you may know maybe better than your colleagues, your classmates, that it is very hard to do trials with patients because they are vulnerable groups, and then you have to be careful, really very careful. I see. So it is often like this, that in there are advertisements in the clinics or in newspapers. Neuroscientists then write that they have a trial and they are looking for instance, stroke patients. And in this case, it was the same. And there was also several advertisements on TV, because these projects I observed were a larger European projects, and they gained patients through TV and so on and stuff like that, and mostly the patients asked the neuroscientists to participate in the trials, and also their families. and I was just an participatory observant. Yes. I was involved as sociologist, but of course I also helped the patients out. Yeah, helped the patients out, the neuroscientists, and as I said, I was also in the operation theater. I was in brain surgeries, but not to heal patients. I was there, of course, to observe the neuroscientists mostly. Also, of course, the patients' meanings or the patients' opinions on the research and so on. So, and these were my graduate theory with this qualitative method. I studied several projects, neuroscientific projects, for about 1 year, and did several short videos and took photos. Yeah. So was this a good answer to your question? I'm not sure, because a lot of people think that I'm a neuroscientist, but I'm not. I see. So thank you for this very important question, because I mean, you touched upon somehow neuroethics, right? So neuroethics discussed several ethical implications for neuroscience. Also for brain-computer or brain-machine interfaces and their usage in the medical field. You might, as you also said, raise philosophical and ethical questions. So as these questions rise, the neuroethicists focus on not directly on the practices of neuroscientific trials, and that's what I'm criticizing. So, and the philosophical and ethical questions focus on neuroscientific trials or treatment that may occur ethical concepts like informed consent, free will, autonomy, patient rights, privacy, mind reading, as you also mentioned, and also linked to futuristic visions of human enhancement, transhumanism, etc., etc. But these neuroethical studies have often in common that ethical arguments are less based on ethnographical fieldwork, looking at the distributed interactions of human and machine, or as I showed you, of social biotechnical constellations within experimental settings, or even at practices of neuroscientific trials. So as I often, they often thought, I mean, new people, neuroscientists who came new within the project, as I said, a lot of came and went back and so on from international projects. So they often thought that I was an ethicist, and I said, no, I'm not an ethicist. And they said, the neuroscientists I met, they said, it would be interesting to have an ethicist here, because they often say they often claim what we should do or not, but we know it better, they said. So sociological research does not lead to an obvious normative conclusion, right? Because it's a descriptive science. So, but ethically relevant knowledge is provided for considerations based on studies like mine, for instance, or Gesa Lindemann has also brilliant studies on BCI and with macaque monkeys. So trials with monkeys, and she also described some processes sociological. So so yes, I mean, sociologists may provide ethical relevant knowledge. I cannot answer your question to 100%. So, but I can say that it is important to look, what do scientists do? How do they do this? Why do they do this? With what concept of living beings? I mean, even a microbe or a rat, these are living beings, right? So, and then maybe they have to think about if they should gradualize somehow the ethics of research within these different living beings or not. So, but I don't know. So, yeah. Yes, I mean, thank you for your question. So, well, you know that I work with grounded theory, and there is a theoretical sampling within this method, and I often have to somehow do my interviews or do field research, and then go back and analyze it, and then maybe to build a new hypothesis on something. And of course, I see when things went wrong. And maybe you know the paradigm model of the grounded theory, the paradigm model where it says when a phenomenon, when there are strategies that lead to a phenomenon, but also that there are disturbances, and you can, I mean, you can obviously see them then, right? Like the problematic situation I tried to describe between the well-being of the patient and the data generation in neuroscience, right? Maybe I didn't give a good example, as I showed you more or less my theory coming from the field. So, for instance, the patient is sitting in front of the EEG monitor and is yawning, and the yawning of the patient activates, of course, something in the brain, other brain patterns, or the motoric areal, as the face movements and the hand movement is also located at this region, which is read out by the neuroscientists, right? So, and then the patient is yawning, and when the neuroscientist is not next to him, then he doesn't see it, and he doesn't know that the experiment has failures. I mean, there are some artifacts in the EEG that can be analyzed and then cleaned out via software programs, of course. But sometimes only by seeing the research subject as a whole, as a gestalt, as a social person within the whole setting, then you can say, well, the experiment was successfully proceeded, right? So, but when you are not sitting next to the patient, you don't know. And sometimes neuroscientists come and say, I said to you, you shouldn't yawn, don't scratch yourself, don't look around, look on the screen, otherwise we will not gain clear data, right? I mean, and the patient then answers, well, when I have to yawn, I have to yawn. And then the neuroscientist say, okay, well, then do it, right? So, and there have been a lot of situations like this, but important for a sociologist then is to step back and to analyze these things, to go to then an abstract niveau and build your theory. I mean, you have a lot of help from on the theory methodology. So there are a lot of tools, which I said, the paradigm model or writing memos all the time is very helpful. Writing theoretical memos, for instance. I mean, when you say you cannot just say you cannot just say, well, I'm equipped with an RFID chip under my finger, and that's why I'm a cyborg. You cannot say this just like this. You first have to define what is a cyborg. It is a cybernetic organism. What means cybernetic? Cybernetic, the principle of cybernetic is the principle of circularity, where where input and output, the cause effect is blurred, right? It is, for instance, when you drive a ship, direct a ship, then sometimes the wind comes from the right, and then you have to turn right, and then rain comes, and I don't know, the waves are high, and so on and so on. And you cannot say exactly then how you reached from town or city A to city B. So how you reach city B. So it is the same with a cyborg interacting with technology. You have to show it analytically, right? So these were two different things, but it was just an example. I hope that I was clear enough. Oh, great. Yeah. Thank you for your fantastic questions. Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you. Bye.